This might be one of the most unrecognizable episodes in an isekai. Because for essentially a midway point episode, maybe getting a flashback isn't the completely unreasonable. You've seen that before. But to have a flashback episode with multiple time jumps, starting from when she was like 8 years old, all the way up to her adult years, but not from the perspective of Natsuko herself, but rather the characters around her, who pretty much fell in love with her or fell in love with things she did. In case of the second point of view, her influence throughout a dozen years pushed so many people to be like the best versions of themselves and fall in love with different things, as she struggles to even comprehend the idea of love in modern times. This is such a weird episode. The whole time I'm watching, I'm like, what is the punchline of this episode? Like, why are we focusing on the characters who aren't going to be a part of this world anyway? Like, what's the... Like, I get showing a backstory of maybe how she went from loving a movie to being a director, but at the same time, what's the point of showing characters who fell in love with her when they were a kid if we're never going to see them anyway again? And the punchline being that so look at it from this point of view. Boy who fell in love with her, and he was able to break the 100-meter dash because of, her pushing him to look like Sonic the Hedgehog. It's as silly as that sounds. You look at the animation club, this dude fell in love with, like, wanting to surpass, like, his rival. And then when you look at it in modern times, this director is really trying to be like, you are so talented, you can do this, but, struggling to get her to understand love. It's just, the way it came full circle is just... The fact that people are sleeping on what is clearly going to be an isekai classic in a decade to come is insane, because this was truly 10 out of 10 and an episode unlike anything we've seen up to this point. Of course, if you want to see my full thoughts and support my work, though, we got the full live reactions available exclusively on Patreon if you're so interested. So the ending was pretty interesting. We see her so happy, bubbly. She's like, wait a second, is this story supposed to be this happy? And then the bird drops in, who is a representation of the director of the original movie that they're in, right? So they're definitely trying to set this back into a negative situation. I mean, I've said it before. I said at the very beginning of the show that I expected her to go back home. And as we've seen more and more, it's very clear that probably CPR, some Heimlich maneuvers are going to happen. And when the show's all said and done, she'll be back in her original world. Whether or not they'll go, it was all a dream, whether it was real, but obviously she's conflicted of it. Only time will tell. But what an episode. Like, I feel like this episode was more what I thought the show was going to be at the start to a degree, because I really thought it was going to be like, oh, they work on an anime, and similar to Keep Your Hands Off Ezokin, when they're animating things, it would look like it's reality, but it's not like they're actually removed from reality. And then we got like a straight up isekai style story. And I really enjoyed this episode for just how bold and different it was. The first part of the story being like, hey, here's this girl, I don't get her. But then she got so passionate because of this movie. And I think it's really interesting because it kind of establishes something about Natsuko as a character. A lot of people didn't care about this movie. We've known that since the beginning. It wasn't like the most well-received movie of all time, but it's got a fan base. The idea that it didn't do that well, but for her, it was like her everything. Like that's her identity in a lot of ways. Imagine like that helping shape your perspective of what's good and what's understandable. And then you get to a point where like, hey, here's this rough draft. It's the general idea of this story. You fill in all the blanks. It basically becomes yours. And she's like, I don't get this. Like, why is she squeeing? It's very interesting because, like, when I see stuff like that, I'm like, interesting. Like, comparing people that I have in my own life who have autistic tendencies, right? Certain things about normal behaviors, like you can explain it, and they're like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't make sense. And that's kind of the vibe I get with her, where she's like, explain love. And it's like, people just get it, right? So it's like, it's so interesting. And then you combine that with her, like, what she thought was great up to this point. It's understandable why she became a gremlin. Like, she's in alleyways, jumping high school kids being like, is this your first love? Or running with toast in her mouth, shaking down her coworkers to the point that they're like, she just robbed me of my first love. Absolutely just pure insanity, but I feel for her. Obviously, seen by how much she was in love with Luke as a kid, and now that she's having whatever this is, dream sequence, otherworld, who the hell knows, it's very clear she's experiencing a first love. She just hasn't had that reality check just yet. So I'm interested to see what they're gonna do, because clearly it was a little too good to be true. We didn't even need the bird to land to say that. They're probably trying to build up to that dark ending. I feel like that's what they really want to do. Next few episodes, shit will probably hit the fan, but they'll survive. All's well that ends well. But the final few episodes, I do think they are going to suffer a similar ending to that of the original, but maybe Luke and her do get a romantic goodbye. And then she wakes up, finishes the movie, bittersweet is what it is, right? Either way, we haven't quite seen an isekai like this, because while I definitely feel like it's a love letter to the medium, and it's a love letter to the animation medium as well, at the same time, you don't get episodes like these often. And when you do, it's not going to look exactly like this. The fact that they produce, like that scene when the girl's heart skipped a few beats and they were doing, it was very similar to how they drew and animate the magical girl transformation whenever the desk is summoned, but they did that for a romance. Kind of like heart a-fluttering, or as the characters would say, squee. This is without a doubt one of my personal favorite episodes I've watched this anime season. It was that good. Like, this is the type of episode that I'm going to rewatch later tonight. And I don't really rewatch episodes all too often. I might rewatch a scene here or there, but like, that's how good this episode was. And we've really never seen an episode quite like, we've seen episodes where there's backstory, sure. But to give backstory, not from your main character's point of view, but from all the characters from multi stages of her life. But it shows how her influence to this world and these characters has pushed people to such heights. Yet now, as she's at where she's always wanted to be, she's at a wall where she's alienating so many people just because she can't understand these basic human feelings. But obviously with this sequence, now she's going to be able to. I think with that first love is going to come a first loss. And I think she's going to experience both before this is all said and done and she wakes back up in her original world. You let me know your thoughts and feelings, and definitely theories if you got any after this week's episode. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here. Of course, ring that bell, and like I mentioned, we got those full live reactions over on Patreon, and hey, while you're over there, I'll also give you a video shout out. So today we got Jose Rafflecoster, Arctic Fox, Nicole, Azero, and we also have Nebson10. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care, and y'all have a good one.